Oh, our lovely Lisa. Ever since she was released, she was basically remembered for her absolutely amazing voice acting work. Wow, you know what I'm talking about. Alright, that's enough now. But aside from that, she isn't actually a character that is pretty famous within the meta, or her usage isn't really high, due to many claiming her not to be a good character. But today I want to change that as much as I can for those of you who watch this Lisa specific guide to bring justice to our Lisa, because I believe that Lisa is the most underrated character in Genshin Impact right now, and hopefully after this guide you will be able to understand pretty much everything about Lisa and how amazingly she is doing in the current patch of Genshin Impact. So be sure to stick around till the end of the video as it's going to be a pretty fun ride. But first, I'd like to thank today's video sponsor, kokenshop. If you're someone who usually top up in Genshin Impact yet finding it to be rather expensive, then check out kokenshop, where you have the ability to buy the Primogems package at least 10% discount. How they work is very similar to Gifted Koda Shop and Razor Gold, plus they have collaborated with many large YouTube channels, so we're certain the process works. They have many games options including Genshin Impact, Tower of Fantasy, many other mobile games, and it's adding Honkai Star Rail in the future as well. And if you wanted other specific gift cards, they are available too. For more information on kokenshop, guys, check out my link in the description. Thank you very much kokenshop for sponsoring this video, and now let's jump back into the video. Now, one of the main reasons why Lisa was so underrated was because of her very complex kit. Therefore, many didn't understand fully in terms of how she is capable of. Well, also she is a character that was given to you absolutely for free, one of the few very first character of the game. Therefore, many have underestimated her potential, especially after considering the sudden impact of Dendro element towards electro elements. It have helped to change Lisa a lot. But moreover, another big reason why she's underrated is due to her heavily misunderstood skill descriptions, as some part of it were written in quite a confusing way or not being absolutely clear to the player. Therefore, it's quite clear why her true potential was being held back, in which we'll now dive deep into Lisa's skills and kit to clear it up for you as much as we can. First off, we have her normal attack. Now, her multiplier within her normal attacks are a little bit lower than many of the other Catalyst users. However, they're also a bit faster too, which becomes slightly beneficial as to have more electro application. Now, Lisa's normal attacks also have a small AoE radius upon impact, so that can be a bit helpful to attack many enemies at the same time if they're actually grouped close to each other, or if there are actually dendro cores available near to the other enemies, she will be able to trigger the dendro cores as well. Now on to Lisa's elemental skill, Violet Arc, which starts to become the more important part of her kit, for it has two options. One is the press and the other is the hold. Now whenever you do the press E skill, she will release a homing lightning orb that deals electro damage while applying a stack of quartz cold conduct status. There will be a maximum of 3 stacks in a small AoE that has a maximum of 3 stacks. Now what this stacks does is that whenever she uses her hold skill, this stacks will count as damage multiplier for her hold skill. And if you didn't realize, guys, Lisa hold skill has one of the highest skilling in the game. So yes, that is to be something of a consideration, especially for a character that was given to you for free. Now whenever you use your hold skill, you will realize that it does take a bit of time for Lisa to actually be able to trigger this, and of course it can feel very slow if you are not aware of how to trigger this properly. For if you didn't realize, then whenever you use your E skill, there will be a slightly visible outer circle that indicates that whenever Lisa charges her skill to match that outer circle's line, she will also have a lightning bolt indication that shows that the charging time is finished, and right at that moment, you can actually just release her hold E skill and it will do maximum power. Now approximately that time will only be around 2 seconds. Obviously you can hold all the way up to around 4 seconds for her E skill, but roughly it will only require you around 2 seconds for the maximum damage output. But something more important about her E skill of course is to try and get the conductive stack as much as you can onto your enemies. Now this might seem to be a chore because on theory it feels as though you have to tap your E skill at least 3 times onto a single enemies before they hit a maximum 3 stacks. And what if you happen to be within a group of enemies? Do you have to actually tap all of the enemies up to 3 times before you can hold her E skill for maximum damage output? And well, this is where one of the main thing about Lisa's kit that was not mentioned clearly, which led to a lot of misunderstanding. For within Lisa's E skill, there's what's basically called a hidden bounce mechanic. But here I'll show you a quick demonstration of how her E skill actually works. So as you can see, her E skill has only been tapped once, yet it applies 3 conductive stack to most of the enemies. And this was done because of the hidden bounce mechanic of Lisa's E skill. For they did actually mention that her tap E skill would have a small AoE range, and so in essence the initial impact of her E skill toward the enemies will produce a small radius that affects every enemies within that radius to have 1 stack of conductive stack. However, what the description does not mention at all is that all of the enemies within that initial impact will also kind of bounce back the radius, and therefore enemies within those AoE range will be given an additional stack. So therefore within a group of enemies, multiple bounce radius will be triggered, in which case, like my showcase here, multiple stacks can be given to the group of enemies at once. Also, if you do notice, some of the enemies only had 2 conductive stack because they were only inside 2 bounce radius, unlike the other who was in 3 or more. So overall, technically speaking, Lisa is a character that performs absolutely fantastic with groups of enemies, for she's going to be able to apply conductive stack a lot faster, utilizing her E skill really well. So now guys, you know that you don't always have to tap 3 times before fully applying 3 stacks onto your enemies, but a more optimal way is going to be try and group them as close to each other as possible, then do an E skill tap, where afterward most likely you will have enough conductive stack to do her hold E skill to dish out very high E skill damage. Moving on, we have Lisa's elemental burst, which is an absolutely amazing part of her kit as well, where she will be creating a powerful lightning bolt field. The range of this field I would say is approximately the same as Bennett's burst, and will constantly discharge targeting random enemies within the field. It has basically a 15-second uptime with a minimum downtime of 5 seconds, which is a pretty good uptime I would say. However guys, the reason why this elemental burst of Lisa is such a good skill is because of her A4 passive, where whenever the opponent is hit by lightning rolls, their defense is decreased by 15% for 10 seconds. Where defense decrease is basically guys the best skills in the game, for as you can see on the screen here, very limited number of characters have access to this, and yet they are locked behind Constellation. But guys, Lisa, a 4-star character that was given to you absolutely for free, has access to this as part of her initial kit, not locked behind Constellation in any way. It's just a pure Ascension 4 passive that you unlock by leveling her up. Plus it also has basically a 100 uptime duration, therefore it is a very valuable part of her kit, making her competitive whenever choosing an electro support character for the team. Now, one misleading part about her elemental burst is the part where it says whenever lightning rolls hit the opponent, they will be knocked back, where this is once again a part of a kit that was not explained correctly. For the knockback guys will only occurs if the enemies themselves herself are airborne. For example, whenever they are triggered by overload and then get hit by lightning rolls, then that is when they get knocked back. Otherwise, lightning rolls will be triggering as a stagger effect onto the enemies, and they will still basically stay where they are. But of course, this is also still something to note, where whenever you're using her burst, it is very important that you have the enemies stays within her circle range, because of course if they are outside of their range, they will not be hit by her lightning rolls. So it's something to keep in mind when you're up against enemies that moves around a lot, or if you're running Hyper Carry's character that has the ability to knock enemies back quite a lot. Lisa's A1 allows her charge attack now to apply conductive stacks from her E skill, which is okay, because what you do want to note is that her charge attack will only apply one singular additional stack and will not have the hidden bounce radius from her tab E skill. So generally it's not really recommended for you to constantly do her charge attack, so that you conserve your staminas for other dashing cancelling. Next up, let's talk about Lisa's constellation, because it is also a very important part of her kit. Now, a huge thing for you to note is that Lisa is an absolutely functionable character at C0. This is actually pretty huge, because many of the characters out there are quite reliant on their constellations. But as for everything regarding to Lisa's kit and her intended role, she is very much already able to cover for you everything, and constellations are mostly there to enhance her quality of life. For her C1, of course, as stated, it is there to help Lisa with energy regen, and this is very good considering energy burst for Lisa is absolutely very important, yet it requires you 80 energy, which is also one of the highest burst energy requirements in the game. Therefore, her C1 would help you a lot with whenever you're building Lisa. C2, guys, is arguably one of, if not the most important part of her constellations, especially for those of you who want to have an on-field holding E skill Lisa without the specific resistance to interruptions. It is almost always required for you to have a shielder whenever you have your Lisa standing there holding her E skill for 2 seconds. And so after her C2 has been activated, it is much easier for you to use Lisa, therefore especially saving a slot of a shielder on Lisa's team. But guys, do note that the importance of this constellation depends on how you build your Lisa. For of course, if you're having her as an off-field DPS or a support character for your hyper carry, then you're almost never gonna be using this constellation too. C4 on Lisa, guys, is very powerful, because it makes her elemental burst deals at least 2.5 more damage, as this allows Lisa to have access to pseudo quadratic scaling, where if enemies are close enough together, when multiple discharge connect and hit, each enemy gets damage in proportion to how many enemies are attacked. Not to mention, it now has the ability to apply defense shred from her A4 to multiple enemies at the same time, while also increase her electro application greatly, allowing Lisa to be a lot more competitive whenever you're choosing an electro character to be on your flex slot of a team building, for example, especially in aggravate and teams that requires a consistency of reactions. And if you happen to be using Lisa in the Hyper Bloom team, C4 is also very important. For now, it allows her to trigger the Dendro cores a lot easier and more consistently. Now, C6 seems to be a very good constellation, and I would say it is. However, many of us actually tend to overrate these constellations, because of course whenever she heads in the field and instantly applies 3 stacks, it's a lot easier for her to do her old E skill. But C6 is not going to be as important of you having at least a C2 or a C4 constellation on Lisa, for example. And if you're already playing Lisa optimally enough, you should be able to apply a lot of conductive stack onto her enemies within a single tap of your E skill. However, of course, if you do have your Lisa all the way to C6, then yes, everything about Lisa's performance is going to be a lot more smooth and a lot easier for you to play her really well. So guys, that's basically Lisa's skill and kit as well as her constellations. You should already have an overall idea of what she is capable of doing. Now I want to touch on some misconception questions that the community or players have had about Lisa and try to go a bit through here. Is first, Lisa takes too long to set up, or her E skill stacking take too long, in which guys we have already covered this in her E skill section, and we know that her tab E skill has the bounce radius hidden mechanic, where within group situation she's going to be able to apply a 3 conductive stacks very fast onto your enemies, allowing her to do her old E skill rather fast. Next is that Lisa requires a shoulder to operate. Now of course this may be the case with Lisa at C0, and if you're trying to have her as an on-field DPS holding her E skill at C0, she will most likely get interrupted when doing her hold E skill. However, that is going to be basically fixed for you at C2. So of course, most of the time before you have Constellation on Lisa, many of us may be going for a support build Lisa, where she's there to buff your on-field DPS character. Therefore, the fact that whether or not she needs a shield or not is not going to be relevant, because she's not going to be standing there holding down her E skill, but more about having her burst up down. But yes, of course, if you're serious about your Lisa, then I would say that getting her C2 isn't relatively that hard, because Lisa is available for you to buy in the shop, guys. You may have to wait for some patches or a few months for her to get back, but it's going to be a lot easier than you trying to get her in the gacha pool. Therefore, investing into her Constellation isn't something that is too hard for you to do. Next is Lisa Elemental Burst has bad knockback. We've also covered this in her burst section. It's also one of the misconceptions that the description in her Elemental Burst has, where her Elemental Burst will only knock back enemies while they are airborne. And then another one is that Lisa is only good at C6. As we've mentioned, she's very much functional at C0. Arguably, one of her most important Constellation is going to be her C2 if you want to have her on field, and her C4 is technically going to be her best Constellation because it changes a lot in terms of Lisa's gameplay and her ability to be on the team to be more competitive toward you choosing Lisa over many of the other really good electro character for the team. So no, of course, Lisa is very much functional pre-C6. And that should be some of the main misconceptions that I tried to take care of regarding Lisa. And by now, you should already have a very good understanding of how Lisa is performing. So the last thing I believe in order to convince Lisa is an absolutely amazing character and has been pretty much underrated ever since the start of the game is to do a bit of comparison between Lisa and Fischl, who is technically the best character in Genshin Impact, and see when or in which situation is Lisa available to replace Fischl. Now, as we have known, Fischl is basically the top 3 or even be the best character in the game in terms of your interpretation, for she's one of the few characters that can literally fit into any teams with an amazing A4 high personal damage and one of the best energy battery for your team out there. And so for Lisa and Fischl, both basically is there to apply electro off field for you. However, Fischl actually does it much faster due to her A4, and if Lisa is actually before she is at Constellation 4. But if you actually have Lisa at C4, then she can start really compete with Fischl in the electro application department, because Fischl is largely a single targeted character, while Lisa at C4 allows her to apply electro to groups of enemies. And once again, as I have mentioned before, if you're serious about your Lisa and love her, then yes, buying her Constellation at the shop is very much viable. Fischl is only going to be a character that focusing on dishing off-field damage for the team, or in other words, Fischl doesn't buff your team while Lisa can. Lisa on her A4 that have the defense shreds alongside with TTDS is a very viable option for her to buff your hyper carries by a large amount. Now yes, you can argue that Fischl has a better buff if you're running her with tenacity sets and elegy, but realistically guys, you want a different artifacts build onto Fischl, and elegy would be for someone else, since you will be compromising so much on her personal damage, which is a very important thing for Fischl. Whereas Lisa at lower investment guys is going to be better than Fischl because she has access to a support build, and that is very cheap. Lisa can also have some preferential team more than Fischl at times, like if you're looking at the flag slot in certain hypercarry teams, which we will be discussing in Lisa's team section, then Lisa's support buffing being there can be a very strong part of that. So guys, if you're looking at the worst case scenario here, Lisa is kind of like a little bit worse than Fischl, but it doesn't matter because you get her for free, and unlike other free characters, she genuinely can work for her intended role without Constellations. By the way, yes, Fischl being one of the best characters out there, while Lisa considered to be a forgotten character that is now comparable to what Fischl in many factors, we can actually see how valuable Lisa can be, right? Especially for those accounts that do not have Fischl. So you can actually see Lisa as more of a budget version of Fischl, sometimes even comparably as good in certain situations, especially where character buffing are required. Alright, with that in mind, now let's move on to some of Lisa's best playstyle and build. She currently, I would say, have 4 playstyle that you can build and play around with, and we'll just go through each of it one by one. First off is going to be her on-field DPS build, which of course is going to be one of her most popular playstyle. As of course, with Dendro element being introduced ever since Sumeru was released, Lisa's core identity has greatly been found and confirmed to be an aggravate DPS due to her kit supports this very well. As a non-field DPS within an aggravate team, Lisa will be able to make use of everything that she has to the fullest extent, from her frequent electro applications, making use of all of her constellations, as well as different shred that she provides to the team, and being a very good driver in general because she does have fast normal attack combo. Now when it comes to talent priority guys, especially for an on-field DPS Lisa build, I would just recommend you to level up all of her 3 talents to as high as possible. And if you really love Lisa, then yes, of course, go ahead and triple crown her, because why not, right? But more so because since you've already leveled up all of her talent, it will be much easier for you to just go ahead and build all of the other playstyle that she has a lot easier. Or in other words, you won't really have to worry too much about her talent leveling up later on when you build Lisa. For our best artifacts guys, generally I would only recommend you to focus on 2 sets. The first one would be Thundering Fury. Generally it's going to be her best in slot when it comes to an on-field DPS Lisa, because she will be able to make every use of this 4-piece set. That is, if you have your energy requirement met. Therefore guys, an artifact set that is a lot more important when you're building Lisa is going to be the Emblem Fate set, because as we have known, Lisa is a character that requires a lot on her elemental burst uptime, especially when her A4 defense shred will only be triggered if she has her burst, and so having a burst that has 80 energy requirement will be very tough for her to have her burst uptime, especially if you don't have any more energy regen that helps her, like Electro Resonance or other character that runs Favonius weapon type. The Emblem Fate set is very important, but not only that, she will also be able to make use of it fully, because when running it with the energy recharge sands, she will still be able to have her elemental burst damage really high. Therefore, overall the Emblem Fate set would technically fit every single playstyle that Lisa has, so it's kind of like an one set that you go with and you don't really have to care too much about Lisa's artifact sets later on, which is really handy. However, if you do feel that your energy requirement is decent on Lisa already, then of course the Thundering Fury set is still an absolutely good set that you can go with. When it comes to artifact stats, of course if you're running the Thundering Fury set, I would assume that you already have Lisa's energy requirement met, therefore you can go with Attack Sands, Electro Goblet and Crit Circlet. However, if you're running the Emblem Fate set, then of course it's going to be ER Sands, Electro Goblet and Crit Circlet. But Lisa's best weapon, generally if you have a very invested account, then Kagra Verity is going to be her BAS for personal damage. It does take a bit of time to set it up for the maximum stack, but once it does, it's going to be a lot better than most of the other options that she has. Next is going to be the Lost Prayer, still very decent option for Lisa. It gives a lot of crit rate, plus since she is an on-field DPS, she's going to be making use a lot when it comes to the passive of giving up to 32% elemental damage bonus from this weapon. Now comparatively almost on the same level guys, if you have the Wisith at very high refinement, we already know how good of a weapon Wisith can be, with absolutely high crit damage being given, plus an insane passive buff for 10 seconds. It's generally going to be the BIS option for Lisa at the 4-star weapon tier. Skyward Atlas for a 5-star still works decently well. Of course, as usual, you will have to focus on building more crit ratio onto your Lisa, because this weapon focuses on giving you attack stat. Next, if you can be invested into the bypass, then the Solar Pearl is a pretty good option, because of course Lisa can make use of everything that this weapon has to offer, including its passive. The more refinement this weapon has, the more powerful Lisa will become. For Lisa's on-field DPS best team guys, I would just recommend you to basically run aggro activate Lisa, and that team usually consists of Lisa, a Dendro character, one other Electro character for Electro Resonance, and a flex slot support character. Usually the team I play around with for Lisa on field the most is going to be Lisa, Nahida, Kuki Shinobu, and Kazuha. We all know how powerful these character combination can be, but that's an even more powerful team option that you can run with if you are very invested into a team, and that is going to be Lisa, Nahida, Fischl, and Zhongli that is running a Kayak Petra set. The main core of this team is going to be our Zhongli running this Petra set because you're basically going to be able to make full use of the 4-piece Petra. Since Geo most of the time is only going to be reacting with Electro, therefore all of your Electro character on the team will basically has a 35% damage buff, which is very good. Next up guys, we have off-field and support build Lisa. Now guys, even though I'm grouping two of this build together, they are technically a little bit different, where off-field is more like you focus on maximizing Lisa's DPS while she's being off-field, whereas support is more about you trying to give as many buff to your team member as you can. However guys, I would say that these two builds are relatively the same, and the main difference was just going to be their weapon usage. So for best artifact builds guys, I would just recommend you to go with the Emblem Fate set because it will covers every energy requirements that Lisa would have. Since she's being off field, she won't be able to generate as much particle, let alone if you run her as a solo Electro character on the team, you will have major energy lacking if you don't run Emblem Fate set. Coming up to the weapons, if you are focusing on building off field DPS to her maximum potential, then you can just generally use similar weapon to the on field DPS build. However guys, since we are building her with Emblem Fate set, there's a weapon that's going to be a lot more valuable while also being free to play too, and that weapon is going to be the Hakushin Ring. Lisa is one of the few characters that can make use of this weapon absolutely perfectly. This weapon gives her energy recharge, which yes, she needs very much, and since we're using Emblem Fate set, there you go, it contributes to more of her elemental burst damage. But not only that, this weapon passive also give elemental damage buff to your team members too, which is valuable and absolutely a perfect slot for an off-field and support build Lisa. So guys, I definitely recommend you build this weapon, especially when it is free and all you need is to collect the materials. One thing to note about how to trigger the passive of this weapon is that Lisa do have to be on field when triggering this, so keep that in mind whenever you want to make use of the Hakushin Ring passive. Building Lisa like this and you're still going to be seeing her doing a lot of burst damage during her off field, but if you're fine with sacrificing a little bit of personal damage on her burst and focus fully onto her support that gives basically all of the attacking power to your hyper carries, then yes, an amazing weapon option would be TTDS. We all know how good of a weapon TTDS is when it comes to supporting, so yes, I don't really have to discuss too much about this. But Lisa's best team build when it comes to off-field DPS or support, generally she fits really well on most of the hyper carries team when it comes to Dendro hyper carry and some other Electro hyper carry as well. Namely, you know, she can run in Tanari team where it features Tanari, Lisa, Yai Mikos, and Yao Yao for example, or Alhaitham, Lisa, Kuki Shinobu, and Nahida. If you're a Wanderer's main, then yes, Lisa can work absolutely well too with Wanderer, Lisa, Farazan, and Bennett for example. Or on Keqing's aggravate teams where it features Keqing, Lisa, Nahida, and Yao Yao for example. And while if you're still using our lovely Eula, then of course Lisa is an absolutely important character on Eula's Superconduct team. So yes, off-field and support Lisa has a very important role on many of the teams, and you will find her do an absolutely amazing job. Next up, another possible Lisa build is going to be Reaction DPS build, where this time around you focus on building Lisa's EM to play on teams such as Hyper Blooms and Overload team. Now do keep in mind that building her like this is more going to be having diversified build for Lisa and having fun with her. For Hyper Blooms and Overload, Lisa isn't generally the best team that she should be functioning in, and of course there are much better Hyper Blooms and Overload teams out there, so do keep that in mind. When building Reaction DPS Lisa, what you want to take note of is that her talent level basically has no contribution in terms of her damage, because now we're focusing on EM stats, and leveling Lisa all the way to 90 is gonna be the most important thing here. When it comes to artifacts build, of course the Gilded Dream is gonna be her best in slot, for it gives a lot of EM towards Lisa. Artifact stats, would you be focusing on either a triple EM build, or if Lisa is still lacking in energy recharge, then you want to go with energy recharge sand. For reaction DPS best damage, an absolutely amazing weapon for her would be the Fruits of Fulfillment, since it is a completely craftable weapon and you can get it for free, but also it gives her a lot of EM and energy recharge, so it's a perfect option for her. If you have invested into your account and have the 1000 floating dreams, then yes, it's also an undeniable good weapon for her, though most of the time this weapon will be safe for Nahida, so we won't be seeing Lisa using this weapon many of the time. Other than that, this Sacrificial Fragment, guys, this weapon also gives a lot of EM, so yes, it is also a considerable choice for her. Now when it comes to team building, of course we have mentioned that would be Hyper Bloom Lisa, and a team I usually run her in would be Lisa, Nahida, Xingqiu, and a flex character where I usually have Kuki Shinobu that satisfies as a healer, another Electro character to support Lisa with Electro Resonant. Overload team would be Lisa, Bennett, Xiangling, and then Kazuha. And then next, there's another absolutely fun playstyle that you can consider if you really love playing around with Lisa's build, and that is gonna be her E-skill Nuke gameplay, because as we have discussed, Lisa E-skill has basically the highest multiplier in the game, therefore we will be able to make use of this to an extent. Obviously guys, this is only for fun gameplay and it's not the most optimal style of gameplay for Lisa, so yes, that is something to note. Now the reason why this is a little bit more popular now is due to our newest artifact sets, the Golden Troop, where this artifact set basically focuses on everything regarding elemental skill damage increase. Sadly a bit, she won't be able to make use of the additional 25% increase when being off field, because we're going to be focusing on doing her hold E skill damage on field. How we build our artifact stats is basically going to be the same as on field DPS, as well as the weapon is exactly the same as well. The main difference would be in terms of her team build, because she needs a certain specific character in order to activate this really well, and that would be Lisa, Bennett, Kazuha, and Sarah, because all of the characters on the team will be focusing on providing as much damage to Lisa as they can, so that she can deal an absolutely high E skill damage for one instant. And another variant of this team would be Lisa, Nahida, Kazuha, Fischl, or Sarah. The only thing lacking with this team is going to be a healer, but if you do manage to survive, this two team will allow Lisa to have very good E skill Nuke gameplay. And so I would say that is everything I have to say regarding Lisa at this point in time. Oh my god guys, that was a very long video, I know, but I just want to make an absolutely dedicated video toward Lisa because we've seen how underrated she is, and after this video hopefully you have been able to see her amazing potential, and she's a very worthwhile character for you to build on your account because she is able to fit into many teams and many more teams to come. I did put a lot of work into this video, so if you did enjoy and found it helpful, just give me a thumbs up on the video and subscribe to my channel for a lot of future Genshin Impact videos and guides. If you do have any question guys, leave it down in the comment section and I will get to you there. I really appreciate you guys sticking with me till this part of the video guys, and with that I wish you a super day and I will catch you on my next video.